Welcome, everybody, to Crystal Kyle and Friends. I'm very excited for today's interview. I'm talking to Chase Oliver, the Libertarian presidential candidate nominee. Thanks for joining me, Chase. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to speaking to your viewers.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. So let's start with this. Tell me about the process of how you won the nomination at the convention, because I'm kind of unfamiliar with the particulars, and I know that there was an interesting story around that.
Yeah, so the Libertarian Party, unlike the Republicans and Democrats, our convention, that's where we actually select our candidate, as opposed to having a primary system. And then our convention is basically a glorified pep rally, which is what we're seeing this week from the Republicans. So I traveled from state to state, speaking to state delegations at their state conventions, who then went to the national convention and voted in rounds of voting. And we basically eliminate the lowest vote getter until we get someone over 50%. In the next to last round, I beat out my nearest competitor. And then in the final round, because I was just under 50%, I had to beat out none of the above, which is on every Libertarian ballot.
So I know that Trump had thrown his hat in the ring and spoke at the Libertarian convention and kind of meekly asked for the nomination, or said he said something that was interesting, and he was clearly trying to, get on the ballot. And then you had RFK, who also kind of tried to get on the ballot and threw his hat in the ring. My understanding is that they kind of it was crash and burn for them. They didn't get anywhere. Can you speak a little bit to that? Was there in the room at the Libertarian convention, was there this kind of attitude of who do these people think they are? They're not even libertarians.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump, he did not even qualify to actually even be nominated for our party, because he had already been the nominee of another party and didn't even get the qualifying signatures to technically be put onto the ballot for our party. And of course, when he came and spoke at the convention, he probably got the most hostile audience he's ever spoken in front of before. He realized very quickly that he was not a libertarian. Libertarians let him know that loud and clear. RFK also had a few smattering of supporters in the hall. I think he got 19 votes and was eliminated in the first round. And so I can say I did beat RFK at a convention vote. But yeah, so and while he came and spoke, and he was smart enough to say everything that was libertarian about him while ignoring all of the non-libertarian things about him. And so he got a slightly better reception than Donald Trump did when he came and spoke at our convention. But yeah, I think I don't think Trump's ever wanting to speak in front of a libertarian crowd ever again.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly give the audience there a lot of respect, because it takes balls to look at this massive celebrity, former president, and Trump and RFK, who's polling at roughly 9%, and to say, look, you're just not, we don't agree with you, and we're going to call that out. I feel like that's very rare. Usually people want to suck up to power when they see the powerful. Tell me about the Mises Caucus. I know that they're viewed as the sort of more right-wing libertarians, and you're not necessarily part of that faction. Have you and the Mises Caucus sort of made up in the sense that they will unify around you and vote for you in a general election?
Well, first, I did want to just add one more point to this, which is we did cheer Donald Trump on one thing when he promised to free Ross Ulbricht, which is something that libertarians across the board do support. And so we wanted to make sure that we did support that when it was said in the hall. Now, as far as the Mises Caucus, first off, my running mate, Mike Tremont, is a member of the Mises Caucus. He is somebody who practices the Austrian School of Economics. He's a wonderful running mate. We also have Mises Caucus members working within our party, both as staff and volunteers. And so to me, we're doing everything we can to try to unify our party with a unified libertarian message going forward. There are people who are always going to have hurt feelings after a convention if their candidate didn't win. I imagine if I didn't win, some of my supporters would be having hurt feelings right now. But all in all, I think we're doing a really good job of trying to bring as many people into the fold and speak a broad libertarian message that everyone across the board can really get around support.
So the libertarian Dave Smith was on the show Breaking Points, and he said that the biggest dividing lines between the Mises Caucus and the rest of the libertarians, I think you could call them more traditional libertarians, is this idea that he says your wing represents more open borders and belief in trans healthcare for kids. So let me ask you, number one, do you believe in open borders, and do you believe in trans healthcare for kids? And number two, what is your perspective on those things, and what argument would you make?
Yeah, I actually think, first off, I support a 21st century Ellis Island. I think if you want to come here to work in this country, you should be able to come through a port of entry, declare who you are, and very quickly get legal status in order to work. This takes immigrants out of the shadow economy. It prevents them from having their labor exploited, which drives down wages for American workers. It also provides safer communities because if you're no longer fearing your status of working and fearing deportation, if you see a crime, you might actually go to the police and report that, where we don't have that right now in immigrant communities. And so at 21st century Ellis Island, we streamline the process of getting guest workers here to work, is better for immigrants. It's better for people at home. It's better for everyone all around. And it's certainly better than the crisis that we have on our southern border that has been caused by both Biden and Trump policies over the last 8 years. And so I don't know if that would qualify, as some people might qualify that as a more open border, a more streamlined immigration process, but I don't certainly think it's a free for all where you just cross the border willy nilly. That being said, as far as gender affirming care, it's not my job to determine the health care for a trans child or not. I support, first off, I don't support surgery for under 18 because that is a very high level of care that requires you to undergo anesthesia. It's permanent body modification. I think that's something that should be waiting until you're an adult. For the rare instances where other medical interventions happen for young trans or non-binary people, I think that decision should be left between a parent, the patient, and the doctor, not the state. I recognize that this is an unsettled science. This is something where there are some studies that say this is a good thing, some studies that say this is a bad thing. I support parents and not the state making that final determination because parents are going to have unconditional love for their kids. If you're a parent, you would fight and you would die for your child. And that means you're going to be the best advocate for them in the realm of healthcare, education, or anywhere else, as opposed to a bureaucrat in a state house or in Washington, D.C. on one side or the other of the issue. I support parental sovereignty here. And so I support parents deciding the best healthcare decisions for their kids. That doesn't mean I want, to trans the children, which is the moniker that some people have said. I support putting healthcare freedom in the realm of individuals and parents if you're a child.
So on the open borders thing, do you view it when somebody accuses you of believing in open borders? Do you view that as a smear? Because based off the position you just described to me here, it sounds like your take is kind of similar to mine, where I think, yeah, we should have a border, we should have rules that go along with it, but in terms of who do you deport, obviously you go with like the violent criminals, but everybody else, if they go through the proper process, then there's no problem with having more people in this country, and they're incredibly productive, and the crime rate overall among immigrants is actually very low. So when you hear somebody accuse you of believing in open borders, does your mind go to, that's kind of a smear because that's not actually my position?
Well, what I think it is I think it is a simplification of a position that allows people to believe what they want to believe. When you hear the term open borders, it can mean all sorts of ambiguous things in the mind of a voter. And so I think it's a political strategy to make it seem like someone doesn't care about the border, doesn't care about people who are here, only cares about immigrants or whatever. And so I don't necessarily think it's a smear. I just think it's a political tactic to muddy the water. Certainly, it's been used against immigration reform advocates for a long time. I don't think this is really new. And, I don't think there's really that much daylight between me and, say, other people in my party who maybe have a little bit more restrictionist policy, who say want to have an invitation only worker program where, hey, you can come here if you're invited to work. I just don't think that's workable. And I think it actually creates a larger state apparatus to get that done, as opposed to streamlining the process and letting the free market determine where labor goes and where it needs to be.
What percentage of the Libertarian Party voters, in your estimation, are more like old school libertarians who actually believe in open borders versus the more new school version that's a little more right wing on issues of the border and, like we said, trans healthcare?
Well, I think most libertarians fall right in line with our platform on both immigration and healthcare freedom. I think that's the majority of libertarians out there, both in terms of voters, in terms of delegates, in terms of activists. That are people who generally think that we should be allowing people who want to come here to work, let them come here to work, let the free market determine where labor goes, because we are big free marketers in the Libertarian Party. And as far as healthcare freedom, I don't know if where everyone falls on gender affirming healthcare. Frankly, this is a newer realm of healthcare that a lot of people just frankly don't understand because they don't have a trans person in their life or a parent of a trans kid. They don't really understand it. And so I think with this kind of new horizon comes a little bit of misunderstanding from some people. But generally, I think libertarians want healthcare freedom because they recognize if we give government this inch to regulate healthcare here, we're going to give them the mile that's going to be used to regulate healthcare for all people. And so that is why I fight for the right of people to make their own healthcare decisions, because I know I don't want my healthcare decisions restricted, even though I'm not trans or non-binary. I just know if we give government that authority, it's only a matter of time before that authority spreads to other people in other areas of healthcare. And I would like to see less state restriction, not more.
So does that viewpoint also cross over into your take on abortion? Like, what would you say your policy preference is for abortion?
Yeah, so I'm pro-choice, and the reason I am is because I think that the decision should be left to the most local government possible, which is not your city or your town. That's actually your own self-governance, your own decision making. And I think we need to reinforce bodily autonomy rights for individuals. And that being said, I support the standards of Roe v. Wade and Casey, which is we should have legal, accessible abortion up to the point of viability. Post viability, there should be some sort of healthcare standard where a doctor says the health or life of the mother is at major risk. And that should be happening there, which of course is the rarest form of abortion. It's less than 1%. But for the vast majority of those, that should be in the realm of choice, as Roe v. Wade and Casey have put forward. And I would support that standard across the country because I do believe bodily autonomy falls within the privacy rights of each and every individual. Those are constitutionally protected rights, and those should be constitutionally protected at the federal level. Some people may disagree with me on this and think that this is a states' rights issue, but ultimately, if you're pro-life and you believe that abortion is murder, wouldn't you want that to also be a federal issue?
Right.
So it's inconsistent to me to say, oh, I'm pro-life, so this needs to be a state's issue. Well, if you believe it's murder, you would want murder to be illegal everywhere.
So let me ask you about some of the stuff going on this week. Now, let me just tell everybody this is being recorded on a Thursday. It drops on a Friday. So by the time this drops, there may have been more movement in, say, the Biden story about whether or not he's going to drop out or stay in. But let me ask you, number one, do you think Biden should drop out of the race? And if so, why? And then number two, do you think he will drop out of the race?
Well, I think after the debate performance we saw, Democrats would be wise to replace him. I, of course, want him to stay in the race because I think it's easier to garner votes if I'm running against both him and Trump, because I think both of them are terrible candidates. I would hate to give Democrats good advice, but the best advice for them would be to replace their candidate with somebody who is not over the age of 80. And I think, post-debate, my campaign saw a lot of renewed interest when we were on the ground campaigning, just for people going, hey, you're not 80 years old, you speak in complete sentences, you support my right to exist or support my right to live my life as I see fit. Man, that's very attractive compared to what the Democrats are giving us. So I would think it would be a good idea for them to do it. Do I think they're going to do it? I'm still kind of 50-50 on it, because Democrats routinely see the easiest thing to do to win something, and they do the exact opposite, which is kind of the MO. It's kind of the modus operandi of the Democratic Party. Even where I disagree with them on things, I'm sometimes very happy that they lose. In fact, many times I'm happy they lose, especially when they let victory slip right through their fingers. So do I think they're going to replace Joe Biden? Probably not, because it's the better idea. And unfortunately for the country, one of the major political parties, Democrats, rarely do the easiest or best thing to have success. So, I think they're just as incompetent as Republicans. So, yeah, I don't think they'll make the right decision, just like Republicans have made a poor decision by running Donald Trump again. I think both of them have made very bad decisions with their candidates.
Yeah, I like how honest that answer was, because you're like, yeah, if he stays in, that's actually better for me. So maybe he should say it. I like that. All right, let me ask you this. So the attempted assassination on Trump, what's your take on it, in the sense that, there is a lot of stuff coming out which either points to just rank incompetence from the Secret Service, but, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's fair for people to question based on all the little facts that are coming out. Like, it's okay to speculate and to think about it and try to go down that path a little bit, because some of the stuff, honestly, you look at it, you're like, this doesn't add up, right? Like waiting 26 minutes, and you had, I forget whether it was local law enforcement or the Secret Service, but they were inside the building that the shooter was on the roof of. You had the cop who went up and he got the gun pointed at him, and then he retreated. You have a bunch of people saying for like 2 minutes, hey, there's a guy right there with a gun, and nobody really did anything in time. So on the attempted assassination of Trump, do you view it as more rank incompetence? Do you think maybe there's something more nefarious going on there? Or what's your take?
I don't think we have enough information to really know that for certain yet. All we do know is there was a lot of failings that happened, and they need to be investigated. They need to be in front of Congress. Congress needs to investigate the failings the Secret Service had here. Frankly, I don't see how the head of the Secret Service is going to keep her job based on this, because the buck stops with the the chief of that organization, and she just did not seem convincing with her statements going forward. The whole sloped roof argument is ridiculous. In fact, my running mate, Mike Termott, went right on his roof, which is more sloped than that roof, with his rifle and was able to actually properly aim. So you could have certainly put shooters on the roof. It was not too sloped. That was ridiculous. I think much of it, you always have to look at stupid or evil, right? Stupid or
Right.
evil. Which is it? It's one of those things here. You're either completely stupid or something nefarious was going on. Either way, people need to be held accountable for that. There were major security failings here. But the thing I will put out there is to those who think this is some sort of conspiracy theory, false flag that Donald Trump was trying to be shot at, you could be the best marksman in the world. And the fact that they nicked the ear and didn't hit the head is like a grace of God sort of thing. Nobody can make that shot. That is a Marvel superhero level of marksmanship. If you're trying to think that, oh, we're only going to nick the ear. So for people thinking that Trump somehow staged this, don't be ridiculous. Don't fall into the trap of that. Remember Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is most likely the correct one. Most likely, this was a crazed 20-year-old with a gun who wanted to take a pot shot at a politician. We don't know the motive yet, but fortunately, he did turn his head at the right moment. It nicked his ear as opposed to going through his head on live television, which I can only imagine the chaos this country would be going through had that attempt been successful. So I thank God it wasn't. I extend my well wishes to the former president and to his family. For that, because I wouldn't ever want to have to live through that. And Lord knows this country wouldn't have wanted to have to live through the outcome if it had been any worse.
So as a libertarian, are there any even very basic forms of gun regulation that you're okay with, like say universal background checks or something like that? Or is it, is your interpretation of the Second Amendment that it's basically no holds barred? People do whatever they want?
I'm a 2A absolutionist. Shall not be infringed is the language we have in the Constitution. So that is where I stand with that. If a local government wants to maybe say you have to, be of a certain age, that's more of a local government issue. But frankly, the federal government needs to be staying out of gun rights. I'm a gun owner. I proudly protect myself wherever I can, and I support the right of the Second Amendment. And frankly, it wasn't gun laws that prevented or that allowed this shooting to happen. It was failures on behalf of the Secret Service, ultimately.
So I'm actually a gun owner too. And I believe in the Second Amendment in the sense that law-abiding Americans deserve to have the right to protect themselves or even use it for hunting or whatever, right? But so there's really no gun regulations that you would support? Not even like a universal background check, for example, which polls at 90%?
No, if there's basic background checks that need to happen, that's what we have. But what I don't want to see is increasing of that. I don't want to see databases happening. I don't want to see registries happening. I don't want to see red flag laws. I don't want to see restrictions on bump stocks or pistol braces or suppressors. I don't want to see the National Firearms Act. I don't want to see any of these things because they are restrictions on our liberty. And frankly, that's where the Constitution lies. That's where I lie. And we all have an inherent right to defend ourselves. And if the government has a right to have a gun, I have the right to have a gun.
One more thing. So the wording is a well-regulated militia necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So I say that to point out the word regulated is in the Second Amendment. So that doesn't give you any pause in terms of very basic reforms.
Yeah, that'd be a well-regulated militia, not a well-regulated on the right to keep and bear arms. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's where the language is. Infringement is any kind of regulation that prevents a law-abiding person from being able to attain a firearm. Anything beyond that is a restriction. I would not support it. I don't believe the Second Amendment does. If we want to change those gun laws, you're going to need to change the Constitution. That requires, I believe, 3/4 of the states. And good luck with that. But until then, what we need to do is we need to be addressing the actual core issues of what creates violence in our society. That's dehumanization. That's lack of empathy. That's the rise of being able to anonymously just attack people and bully people on social media, which has created a breakdown in mental health. And that's the overuse of certain drugs that probably should be not used instead of talk therapy and other therapies that could exist out there, but are prevented you from the war on drugs. Things like psilocybin therapy, MDMA therapy. These things can allow folks with trauma or with anxiety to break through those issues a lot more quickly than just throwing them on psychotropic drugs, which is one of the common factors we see in mass violence.
So on the issue of drugs, do you believe in decriminalization or do you believe in legalize, tax, and regulate?
So I believe in full decriminalization of all drugs for, basically if you're an adult, put what you want in your body. I believe in that because ultimately that creates a situation where we can actually address addiction not as a criminal justice issue, but as an issue where we're handling it on the issue of health and needing to get people healthy. I think it's bad to throw people into prison beds, which are trauma factories that re-engage people's addictive qualities as soon as they get out of jail because they're traumatized from prison. What's the first thing they do to seek that comfort is go right back to the addiction that got them there in the first place. And so I would rather see a deregulated environment, much like they have in the nation of Portugal. When they did that, they saw IV drug use, heroin use drop dramatically, as well as the public health outcomes like hepatitis and HIV rates drop precipitously because of this. It allowed people to actually prevent overdose. If we had a decriminalized drug situation in this country, if you were a user of opiates, and you think, hey, I want to know what's in this, you could take it to a pharmacy, pay a small fee, and they'll tell you if there's fentanyl in that or not, if you're going to OD on that or not. Coincidentally, that will lead to less overdoses and a more clean quality of drug market that exists for those who do use. That is not a good thing. I don't want people to be using drugs, but I want people not to be ODing on the drugs they're using. And then through mutual and direct aid programs, we can help people get off of drugs and get into rehabs and help themselves. But it starts with decriminalizing and changing this war on drugs policy we've had since Richard Nixon, which has not worked. If we are fighting a war on drugs, drugs have won the war, okay? And we need to recognize this and change our policy.
It's funny because I feel like on the issue of guns, I'm definitely less libertarian than you are. But on the issue of drugs, I might even be more libertarian because my perspective is more, I would legalize different versions of most drugs that are out there. I think you should be able to go to CVS and get Adderall or get maybe even a regulated amount of cocaine in terms of its potency. I mean, I actually think legalizing is better because that truly fosters an environment more of freedom. And I also think that, I think Dr. Carl Hart released statistics a while back that something like 80% of all substance users are moderate users. So they don't even get addicted. It's the 20% we have to worry about. And we can set up treatment centers for those types. But so your take is just decriminalization. I assume legalize marijuana, but decriminalize the rest. Are there no others that you would legalize?
Well, by decriminalize, I mean there should be no criminal penalty for use, possession, or even sale of. I don't want legalization because I don't want to create a regulatory framework taxing it, selling it under licensure. I want people to be able to free to use and barter and trade as they want to. Fully deregulated marketplace. I don't think that you should have to get a license to, frankly, really across the marketplace. I think we should treat Larry Sharp, I believe, is the one who said this. He's the former gubernatorial candidate of New York, that we should regulate cannabis like we do onions. You know, it should just be something you can go buy from the store. I really feel that way with about any other drug. You should be able to regulate it for adult use for just about anybody without having a tax and regulated framework of what can be sold and who can sell it. Ultimately decriminalize the entire marketplace, but allow for free trade of these things. Yeah, you should be able to go to a CVS and buy a small amount of cocaine as an adult if you want to. I just don't think that the government should have to get their take on it. I don't think it necessarily should be taxed or it should be incentivized to say, hey, if you buy this cocaine, it'll help pay for schools.
Yeah,
okay, I don't like that.
We're closer than I originally thought on the issue. I do believe in some semblance of a regulatory framework. Like, for example, I wouldn't want somebody to be able to go get crystal meth because there are safer versions of uppers that won't also rot the teeth out of your mouth. So I'm okay with regulation to keep like the worst versions of drugs off the marketplace, but I do want safer alternatives. So, but we're not too far apart there. I just believe in a little more of a regulatory framework than you do. All right, so now let me ask you about your views on healthcare. This actually might be our biggest disagreement. I noticed in your healthcare plan that you want to deregulate big pharma. My question to you is, how do you do that and avoid a situation where some totally unregulated drug ends up killing a colossal amount of people, and then only after the fact we realize, hey, this should probably be off the market?
Well, I think what we need to look for is, frankly, alternatives to the FDA model of the government deciding safety and efficacy of drugs. Frankly, we've seen that two things. One, they don't always get it right. They're not perfect. They're not some sort of infallible institution. And B, they take too long to get new drugs in the marketplace that can save lives. So what I would like to see is actual safety and efficacy being done in the free market, where consumers can actually see what these organizations are doing to test the safety and efficacy of drugs, who's being transparent, what the trials look like, what information looks like, so we can be informed consumers. Our doctors can be informed doctors to know what drugs are the best for us. Now, this may sound crazy to people, But this is exactly what would happen. We would still need to test the safety and efficacy of drugs if we didn't have an FDA. Consumers would demand that. That's something that people would want to see. Like they would want to know that what they're taking is safe. It's just who is a better apparatus for that? I don't think the FDA has been very effective. And as a libertarian, I know that we can have free market options that would provide safety and efficacy and actually provide competition amongst firms who are judging safety and efficacy of drugs to ultimately see what goes forward. But as long as we have an FDA, frankly, we need to be removing the efficacy factor of things and just really looking at safety of what's safe and not safe for someone to be putting in their body, and then be allowing consumers and trials and other things to be able to determine what's the most effective treatment for a particular disease.
So in a situation like with the drug Vioxx that came out in the late 90s, I mean, I would contend that if anything, the government needed to never approve it in the first place. But they did approve it. And then later on, they realized, okay, this is leading to a tremendous number of strokes and heart attacks and all sorts of issues like that. And in that scenario, would you say, yes, it is the government's place to step in and say, you know what, this drug can't be on the market because it doesn't do the thing that they say it's supposed to do. It actually hurts people.
Yeah, so this is why I support removing tort caps and creating really stiff liability penalties for malpractice or for bad drugs out there. Because, okay, in a world with a libertarian world where we don't have the FDA, what happens if one of these private firms says this drug is safe and effective, and then it goes out there and kills a whole bunch of people? Well, you're going to get sued because either your process was flawed for testing it, there were things that you did that were wrong in the process that can be proven out in a court of law, and you'll be bankrupted by a civil penalty. And then no longer will you be deciding the safety and efficacy of drugs. This is actually a free market incentive for these firms to be much more thorough than, say, the government, because you can sue the FDA, but the FDA will still exist afterwards. And so this is actually creating a true market incentive to have the safest and most effective drugs being put onto the marketplace. Now, in terms of what happens after that, these drugs harm people, absolutely, consumers should be able to sue a drug company for saying you didn't take the good enough steps to determine that your drug wasn't going to harm people because you went to some flawed testing facility that wasn't doing their job either. Sue them both out of existence. Remove tort caps. This is what creates the ability for giant corporate firms to basically build into the cost of business of we're going to screw up a few times, we'll get these maximum penalties of $200 million, but we sneeze that and it just falls out the couch cushions. And so what we need to be doing is removing these tort caps, allowing citizen juries to bankrupt firms that do harm directly to people. What will happen to these organizations? They will fall by the wayside. Their assets will be liquidated and absorbed by another firm that will do a better job of providing safety and safe and effective drugs.
Yeah, I guess I fear that any sort of private ability to test these drugs would be funded by Big Pharma, and they have every incentive to sort of lie about it. And then only after the fact, after X number of people die, then it's like, okay, yeah, we got to take this off the market. So I kind of want to try to nip that in the bud up front. But let me ask you about your view on the budget deficit and taxes. So I know that as a libertarian, you both want to cut taxes and you also want to balance the budget. But which of those things would you prioritize? So which is higher on the list? Because historically, when Reagan and George W. Bush and Trump, when they cut taxes massively, they had exploding national debt and annual deficits. So which of those two things is a higher priority? Would it be cutting the taxes or balancing the budget? All right, guys, what you just saw was a little piece of my interview with Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver. It was a great interview, and we went really deep on policy. So you're going to want to see the whole thing. Again, you're only seeing a little piece here. We got into the economy and foreign policy and social issues like drugs and abortion and Trump and Biden and Social Security and Javier Milei, who's an anarcho-capitalist libertarian. And by the way, massive failure. We got into all these different issues. You're definitely going to want to check it out. You can sign up below on Substack for Crystal, Kyle, and Friends. You can pay $5 a month and get the full video of every interview or discussion or debate, or you could sign up for free and get the full audio podcast delivered right to your email inbox. But definitely sign up. You're not going to want to miss this one.